Father Joe, Grandpa, he calls me when I come here because I visit the children and then I go home, back to retirement. Father Kevin, special mention to the newly ordained from the parish, Father James Culway and Deacon Matt Lawler, who's on for the Mass today, with Deacon Bob Lester, ordained in 2004. And for all those who ministered here over 75 years, some still, such joy to have you here. I ask your prayers too for Father Russ Lowe, a son of the parish who's very ill. This is crazy, but crazy good. Bishop Robert Barron quoted St. Catherine of Siena on the Feast of the Sacred Heart. She said that God is crazy in love with us. I am crazy in love with you. Jesus is the Good Shepherd who was crazy to leave the 99 sheep unattended and go in search of the lost sheep. We have a statue of the Good Shepherd at the entrance to remind us of that. Jesus is also crazy in love for us to leave heaven and come down to Nazareth. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? Can anything good come out of Strongsville? And I respond, 75 years of St. Joseph's Church parishioners who have been such a blessing to Strongsville. My framework today is the 6 pastors of St. Joseph, so that you know when I get to Father Joe, it's near the end. But my real story is not about us crazy pastors, or the 31 parochial vicars, or the 46 religious sisters, or the 5 deacons. The main story is you who are the church. You are God's building, the living stones, the real inspiration for ministries, the real sweat, blood, and tears that have built up the community. So please pardon me when I tell some iconic stories about some crazy priests and other characters. Celebrate and remember you. Father Joe McGraw, first pastor, 1946, was a military chaplain. I always remembered his military creds when I celebrated Mass with his chalice. In the base, there are 3 stones, red, white, and blue. Strongsville was not very familiar with Catholics at that time. There were just 170 families that had to travel to St. Mary's in Berea. Archbishop Hoban read a letter from a Mrs. O'Grady, mother of the future priest, Father Denny O'Grady, pleading for a church and a school in Strongsville for the Catholics. That letter was the tipping point to establish this new parish that would have the pastor's name, Joseph. You know the story of the meeting of parishioners in June when they celebrated the first Mass on my birthday, June 30th. And Father McGraw had a wish and a prayer to have a church by Christmas. It happened as a DIY, do it yourself, with little money and many volunteers. Father McGraw requisitioned a military-type Quonset hut, and it became the first church with 6 months of hard work. Today's program is a wonderful double image of the old sanctuary and the new sanctuary. Denny O'Grady, the future priest, served that Mass on Christmas. Remember, 25 years ago when I gave the homily for the 50th, I started with an umbrella because the condensation in the church at Christmas rose to the steel struts of the Quonset hut and came down as rain. I feel a need to drop a personal note here. Talk about crazy. About 10 years later, in 1957, a 15-year-old seminarian named Bobby Sanson, me, was driven to St. Joseph Rectory by his mother to visit Father Paul Lehner. Father Lehner was appointed first pastor of St. Ambrose in Brunswick, but there was a cornfield and no rectory, so he lived with Father McGraw. Bobby was in 5th grade when Father Lehner surprised him in front of his house in Cleveland Heights. Bobby was not raised in any religion, and Father Lehner invited him to a Catholic school, St. Louis, Cleveland Heights, and crazy idea, he went. And who would believe the crazy story that little Bobby became a Catholic, then a priest, and then returned as pastor here in 1991. If I had to characterize the years of Father McGraw, he built up the Catholic presence in Strongsville as a good contributing, serving community. The city came to accept St. Joseph Church as a wonderful people and civic community, but not always without opposition. One of Father McGraw's strengths was the quality of Jesus in the gospel. Jesus is only a teenager, but he stands up to his parents by remaining in the temple. He's an obedient child, but he must be obedient to his heavenly Father and do his will. Following his God-given mission to be a teacher and rabbi, he frightens his parents. But Mary and Joseph come to a new relationship with their divine Son, who never disrespects them, but grows in wisdom, age, and grace. Father McGraw stood up to the powers that be, and soon after, he had busing for his Catholic school students. Father McGraw began plans and construction of the new church in '64 when the terrible tornado hit Strongsville on Palm Sunday, 1965. We know the Quonset hut, the parish hall, much of the school was destroyed. The good news is that the Palm Sunday crowds were safely back home. Clementine Werfel, the housekeeper, was safe in the rectory, and the new church under construction remained intact. But it was not long after that that Father Joe McGraw died of a heart attack. Father James Mcdonough, the second pastor, had been a professor at the old St. John's College, where nuns and other school teachers and nurses were trained. He was a very proper and intelligent gentleman who presided over the parish with much wisdom. As he continued building the present church, he maintained his friendship with Monsignor Joseph Moriarty, director of liturgy for the diocese. Father McGraw had originally worked with Monsignor Moriarty on the plans for St. Joseph Church, so the design would be in accord with the Second Vatican Council, which had just finished in 1965. We still see the results of those liturgical decisions. We have a beautiful church that's open, inviting, and focused on Christ, really becoming present on the altar, but also in the people who serve together. One funny, crazy story is that when the new church was dedicated, Bishop Isenman stood in the back with his MC, Father Ed Luca, and asked him, "Where's Jesus?" What he meant was, "Where's the tabernacle?" In every church in Cleveland, Behind the main altar was a tabernacle, and it wasn't there. Father Lucas said, well, it's in the new side chapel, the Blessed Sacrament Chapel, which you approved. Bishop Isenman said, I did. Vatican II embraced that Blessed Sacrament Chapel, which you have embraced as a 24/7 adoration place. Father Mcdonough went to the St. Patrick's Day parade in Cleveland. When he returned, he said to the housekeeper, Clemmy, I don't feel so well. I'm going down to lie down for a while. Well, it turned out to be his eternal rest. The bishop appointed Father Robert Donahoe, a professor at Borromeo Seminary. Father Donahoe was my French teacher. He was a fun-loving and very creative priest, and I would characterize those years as parishioners being very creative in ministering to many needs of the people. These were years of Christ Renews His Parish, program of spiritual renewal, where it was largely run by lay people with witnesses and talks, encouraging people not only to come to church and practice their faith, but to get involved in church, to be crazy in love with Jesus, and to be willing to do their part to build up the church. We still enjoy today the happy results of those ministries of people involved at this parish. New ideas were born. I believe that St. Joseph's was the first parish in the country to have a pre-Cana Day weekend for couples preparing for marriage, and wrote the book on it. The Catholic community of Strongsville had grown so significantly by then that Bishop James Hickey founded a new parish in southern Strongsville, St. John Neumann in those days. And he said there's going to be two parishes, but both have the same school. First interparochial school, a wonderful model. And in 2007, it became a blue ribbon school. But with all this growth and administrative responsibilities, Father Donahoe resigned and took a little parish in Peninsula, Mother of Sorrows. Father Anthony Dodd was named the fourth pastor. I knew Tony as a very holy man, rather shy, who liked to save money and fix things himself. He was a carpenter, like St. Joseph, and during this time, the parish began to be called St. Joseph the Worker Parish. Many years later, we searched the diocesan archives, and we failed to find any official change of name, but it is a good title of St. Joseph, the Worker, and did characterize much of what Father Dodd accomplished here. Much of it was spiritual. Like Solomon in the first reading, who lifted up his arms in prayer to the Lord, Father Dodd was a very charismatic priest who relied on the Holy Spirit for guidance and for healing. Healing's important to this parish, especially today. In his later years as pastor, Father Tony was not a well man. The housekeeper, Clementine, followed doctor's orders and a healthier diet for him. Clemmy was a farm girl from Pennsylvania who was a saint, devoted to all 5 of us pastors. That alone qualifies her for canonization. She was a magical gardener with a beautiful rose garden, thanks to a boatload of manure. But she was no gourmet cook. Once a priest asked her to cook his steak more rare. "If you want it more red," she said, "add more ketchup." I saw Father Dodd near the end at his sabbatical in Texas, and he resigned shortly after and died about a year later. Then there was me. I had been a parish priest, judge in the tribunal, canon law professor in the seminary, taught 4 years in Washington, D.C. at the Catholic University of America, and when I returned in 1990, Bishop Pilla asked me to be a parochial vicar for at least a year. So after a year at St. John Bosco, I applied to become pastor here. Bishop Pilla said, "St. Joe's is a wonderful growing community, but the facilities are very inadequate, such as 3 basement meeting rooms." He said I had to build, and build we did. I came in 1991 with much planning, input from parishioners. We raised about $1.5 million, and I'd like to give a shout out to Mr. Rick Kravanka, who was then head of the Pastoral Planning Office. He devoted innumerable hours to St. Joseph Church and St. John Newman Church with Father Bob Craig, who was doing his own parish project, and together the school project with the kindergartens and the gym and other things. I always like to get good input from our good people, from staff, to proceed from a shared decision-making process. But sometimes I consulted so much that someone said to me, "For goodness sake, just make the darn decision." I cleaned up the language for live streaming. I am not, thank God, going to recount all my accomplishments. I simply give thanks for all of you that made these ministries happen. It seemed like we became all things to all people and had a ministry for every need and group. I'm most proud of the ministries to the hurting, the divorced, the mentally ill, the alcoholics, and the needy. I would like to highlight just 2 categories. You really responded to the poor. Presently, Ministry of Assistance continues this. The other is our mission to El Salvador. You know that our diocesan missions in El Salvador since the 1960s have been very dear to my heart. My visits to El Salvador with many of you also created our sister parish relationship with San Jose Villanueva, St. Joseph's in Villanueva, El Salvador. The idea was much more than sending money and scholarships to a very poor parish, although that continues to be important. San Jose is a truly equal sister parish that teaches us so much about the true ministry of a parish community, to care for each other and especially be mindful of the most vulnerable members. Today they continue to face grinding poverty, violent gang activity, drugs, alcohol abuse, and broken families. Thank you for your continuing care. After 20 years as your pastor, I was happy but exhausted at age 70 and resigned to become a senior parochial vicar, St. Peter's, North Ridgeville, where I could be a parish priest without the burdens of administration. Father Joe Mamich is the best person I could think of as my successor, and after 10 years, I have not changed that opinion. I know he would not want me to list all of his accomplishments. His illnesses and the trials of recent years have been terrible. His response and yours have been amazing grace. By the grace of God, I believe his burdens have become his blessings. By the grace of God, he has become such an empathic minister and a priest after the heart of Christ. But he is all this, even though he and I and all the pastors before us have been a little crazy in our own ways. But in the words of St. Catherine of Siena, we are crazy with love for God and for you. I again remind you that this is not about us, the pastors, but about you, the people, past and present, for 75 years. St. Joseph Church is Christ's presence in Strongsville. You have become the lifeblood to each other and the community. Over the years, look at your contributions to Strongsville, to our elected leadership in public service, to our number of first responders, safety forces, military services, and volunteers that enrich Strongsville. Yes, we are a little crazy in love for Jesus, so we may be crazy happy with him forever and together.